Finally, we're going to be getting to the good stuff, starting from here with the carbon dioxide data downloaded from our data logger, to which was connected to carbon dioxide monitors reading in parts per million. We go from looking at something like this, which looks like the matrix, to importing it into Excel, where it looks a little bit better, something like this. Then, in our second tutorial in Excel, we changed the formatting and added calculated fields and changed the time so that now it reads off in sensible looking units of every 4 minutes, which is how often we log the carbon dioxide concentrations, and including fields like bias, where we could look at the difference between the two carbon dioxide monitors as a proportion of the carbon dioxide monitor number 2, which we were assuming is the better carbon dioxide monitor. And now we're going to get to the good stuff. We could go all the way from looking at something like this, which is kind of like looking at the matrix, to, as Cypher says, finding the woman in the red dress, which is, of course, the graphs. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our data with the calculated fields and now really review it. It's still pretty hard to determine what's going on with this data. This is only 24 hours worth of data. It is logged every 4 minutes, but you can see that if you log hourly data, for example, over days and weeks and months, you're going to end up with something that looks like this, and it's really hard to just scan through it and make any sense of it at all. The first thing that we're going to talk about is filtering, which is a fantastic feature of Excel that I use every day. The first thing I'm going to do is make a copy of this and do the work in filtering and making a chart from a copy of this data. Remember, in the previous video we demonstrated zooming, which is jumping to the edge of a continuous block of data or a set of contiguous blank cells by doing Control arrow in the direction you want to go. Well, you can also select zoom by doing Control Shift arrow. So I'm going to put my cursor over A6 where the hour header is, hold down the Control key, hold down the Shift key and press the right arrow, and that selects the whole row of headers. And now with the Control and Shift key held down with my left hand, I am going to press the down arrow, and that in one zoom selects the whole block of data, and it doesn't select more than the data. In general, you don't want to do operations on larger sets of data than you have to. So with that set of data selected, now I'm going to just right click anywhere and say copy, and now I'm going to open up a brand new sheet in Excel, and I'm going to put this data in the same place in this new sheet, starting in A6. So I'm going to put my cursor in A6. Now I'm going to right click and say paste, and there is all the data. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger looking so old people like me can see it. Now I want to figure out a little bit of what's going on in this data. I want to scroll through the different values. I want to get a sense of what's in here in terms of the maxes and the mins. So I am going to select the whole row of headers. I am going to make sure that I can see the ribbon by allowing Excel to display the ribbon. With the headers all selected, I'm going to go over here to Sort and Filter in the editing chunk, select Filter. And this puts down arrows next to each one of my headers, which allows me to look through everything that's in there in terms of the range. First of all, I'll click on this down arrow next to hour, and you can see that there's options. You could sort it. You can apply number filters, but just to look through it, the first thing I always do is say, okay, this is one 24-hour period of data, and it starts at midnight, and it goes all the way till 4 minutes till midnight. So that's great. And I could see that it's got this correct range of data in terms of what I expect to be in there. I click OK. Now for parts per million 1 and parts per million 2, you could just quickly get an idea of the range by pulling through. You can see, what the heck? Look at those high values there. I definitely want to take a look at that. And these high values, over 1,000, that was not apparent to me when I just scrolled through the data. So I'm going to say cancel. Let's see if similarly high data was reported from the second carbon dioxide monitor. And I pull this down and I see, oh, probably even higher, 1,670 parts per million carbon dioxide. And the average, of course, then will have a similar range of values. Let's see how far the bias went between the two by clicking this down arrow next to bias. And then I could see there's negative values, but not that many negative values. Actually, they're mostly positive values, which means that in general, probably carbon dioxide 1 was higher than carbon dioxide 2. That's good for getting an idea of the range of data here. But I need to see the woman in the red dress. I need to see a picture of this in order for me to really get an idea of what the story is behind this data. Whenever I'm going to make a chart, I like to click this zooming button down here in the lower right of Excel so I can see a bigger part of the whole sheet. So the first thing I'm going to do is select the first header that I want, which is hour, and it's going to be in the x-axis. Then I'm going to hold down my shift key and click B6 for parts per million 1. So now I've got my two headers selected, and now I'm going to do that zooming again, the control shift down. So control shift, holding those keys down, I click the down arrow and that selects all the data that I want from the first two columns. Now that I've got the data selected, I go to insert, chart, and please, please, please use scatter charts or XY charts. You will get into less trouble and you can make them look just as beautiful as a line chart, but you will be plotting what's called continuous variables instead of category variables. Basically, whenever you've got a range of numbers, it's supposed to be a continuous variable, not categories like John sold how many mowers and Betty sold how many mowers. Those are categories, but we're talking about continuous variables, which are best plotted on a scatter chart. Excel tries to make too many interpretations of other kinds of charts. So I'm going to click scatter, and then I'm going to go ahead and click that I want a scatter chart with straight lines and markers, and we can change all that after. So I'm just going to click that. Whoa! It created a chart that looks pretty weird right off the bat. I'm going to open it up a little bit. One of the important things about Excel, and if you make a chart and you use these filtering buttons, any object that you have in the sheet, like a chart, pull it up to the top of the sheet. That way, if you filter out rows of data, your chart won't be all squished. Let's take a look at this chart. Does this make sense in terms of what we know we did that day with these two monitors? We set it up to start at midnight. Then at about 9:45 in the morning, the people started coming into the classroom. These carbon dioxide monitors were set up side by side in a classroom. And then I decided to do an exercise in which we maxing it out by blowing our hot air into the carbon dioxide monitors, which happened about 9:45. Fortunately, I have my logbook and I can see that, and I would not treat this then as routine data. The important thing to see here is that instantly I can tell a story. I can see what happened with the data, whereas if I scroll down, even though it's nicely formatted, and even if I use these buttons here where I can click the filter button and look at the differences and the maxes and the mins, I still can't tell as much of a real story about what happened as I have with this chart. Now this is great, but I want to see how the other carbon dioxide monitor 2 compared to this. So leaving this chart just as it is, I'm going to select another column of data and then I'm going to add it to this chart as a new series. So I'm going to click here in the header for parts per million 2, and I just want to select this column of data. So I'm going to hold the control key down and the shift key down, and then I'm going to click the down arrow, and that selects that whole column of data from parts per million 2. Now I can't go back up by clicking on the screen or it will unselect my column, so I'm going to pull this up over here to the right. I'm going to click copy. So I want to copy this into the chart. So I'm going to click on the chart to select the chart, and you can see it's got these little 3 dots that make an edge around the chart when it's selected, and also you have a new menu item at the very top where it says Chart Tools once you have the chart selected. So I'm going to click on Chart Tools, and then I'm going to click Layout tab. This is all I do with charts. I don't deal with all these other design stuff. They're for fancy sales people. So I just go to Chart Tools and Layout, and then what's nifty here is there's this selection box over here. So instead of trying to select, am I selecting the series, am I selecting the axis, and not knowing sometimes what you're selected just because of the way you're clicking on it, you could go over here and tell Excel exactly what you want to select. So I want to paste this series into this chart. So with the chart selected, I'm going to go to Home, Paste Special. And Excel opens a dialog box now asking you, do you want to paste this column, parts per million 2, and you can tell this is what's selected because it has these little like danger no crossing borders around this cells that are going to be pasted special as what? We want to say yes, we want it to paste it in as a new series. The Y values are in columns. Yes, we've got this column here, and that we want it on the plotted on the Y axis. The series names in first row, yes, parts per million 2 is the header, and that's the first row. And now I'm going to click OK. Wow! Look at that. It added this parts per million 2 as a new series automatically with a nice red color, and we can see clearly parts per million 2 is consistently less than parts per million 1. Now we can do some really nifty things here. First of all, if I were going to finalize this chart, I would definitely want to add labels. This over here is called a legend, and Excel usually adds that for you, which is good, or else you can't know which series is which color. I would definitely add a label to the horizontal value axis, and I would add a label over here saying parts per million. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick. So again, with Chart Tools selected, I go to the Layout tab, and I want to add a label to the Y-axis. So I'll click over here, and I'll say I want to do something with the vertical value axis, and that selects this axis over here, and I want to add a axis title. So I click this drop down box, and it asks, do you want to do something to the primary horizontal axis title? No, we want to do something to the primary vertical axis title, and you see there's no title there, which is why none is selected, and we want to make it a vertical title, and there it puts it in with axis title, and the letters are kind of screwy, but you click in the title so that you've double clicked and you can see that you've selected something, and I'm just going to type in parts per million CO2, and now we've got a vertical axis title. And you can see that if you click on the chart, and then you click on Chart Tools, and then you click on the Layout tab, you can select all these different aspects of your chart. So really the Layout tab is where you want to be to add cool stuff to your chart. I want to show you one last thing, which is how you can make this a dynamic chart depending upon your selection of data. First of all, I'm going to zoom out a little bit more so that I can make this chart a lot bigger and we can see it more easily. To make this chart a little bit easier to read, I am going to reformat both of the series. And you can see that the markers for the points are way too big, and then down here where they're all squished together, it's just this giant blur. So it's hard to distinguish between the two series. I'm going to select the series by clicking on it, and you can tell that I've selected multiple points along the series, because you can also select just one point if you want to. And if I go to Chart Tools and Layout, then you can see over here that I've got what I want to have selected, parts per million 2. So I want to reformat this. So I'm going to go to Format, and I'm going to format the selection, which is still shown over here as ppm2. And this brings up this dialog box in which I have options for how I want to chart this red line here of the second carbon dioxide monitor parts per million reading. So first of all, I don't want to have these big red blobs, so I'm going to say none. And now you can see it's just a nice line. And I'm going to make the line a little bit thinner here by going to marker line style and taking it down a little bit to 0.25 points. And now if I click outside the chart, you can see that is a lot easier to read. So we could do the same thing with the other, and there's a lot of really fun formatting you can do. You can make the background be clouds. Remember, just select the chart, go to Chart Tools, and then Layout, and then select what you want over here, and then you can put in all sorts of stuff by going to Plot Area. It could be cool to have your air quality data plotted against a background of your air quality monitor, but we don't have time to show you all that. What we will look at is how we can filter the data and have it show up in the chart so that you can look at various scenarios. I'm going to make this small again so we can see the whole thing. Say we are interested in just when the bias was over a certain amount, and we want to just look at that data. So I can click over here in the drop down arrow next to bias, and I can say number filters, and there are all these different options. Only show those rows where the value of bias was greater than a certain amount, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, between. I'm going to click above average, and that then changes the chart so it only shows bias values that are above average, which look to be around 9.7, 9.4, and the chart changes so that you could see how the bias is greater, which makes sense since that's the bias that we selected. So you can see when you have filtered your data, the drop-down box becomes a funnel, and then over here the row indicators are in blue, so you can see right away that stuff's been filtered out of this data. I'm going to remove the filter from bias, and then voila, there's all your data back. You can do any one of a number of things here. Say you wanted to only look at the values during a certain time period. For example, when people were coming to work that morning. We only want to pick when the time was, let's just say, after 9 o'clock. So we're going to say greater than, and then here you could even pick from this drop-down box, show rows where the hour is greater than, and then you can select what you've got in your selection, or you could just type something in, and I'm going to say 9 o'clock. Okay. And now you see it starts at 9 and it goes on, and my chart is all squished up at the top of the page, but you can still see it, and it shows just the data beginning at 9 o'clock onward, tapering off after people have left for the day, going down. So now I'm going to clear the filter and the chart is back. We could look at only the data when the difference between the two was less than a certain amount. There's all different ways of looking at your data when you're using the sort and filter with your headers. And remember, you have to have a contiguous block of data, and you have to select all the headers so it doesn't mix up which values with which time, for example. And you make a XY scatter plot.